nervous, so you might have to bear with me. My testimony itself is called Life-Saving Grace, because it is only by God's grace that I'm actually stood here now. Okay. I spent the majority of my life feeling lost, hurt, and unaware of who I really was. With every circumstance, my role changed, which led to a life consumed with false responsibility. At 2, I was already playing the mother role, and protective instinct overtook. I had decided I had to be the voice for others, protect and fight for the lives of others, all at the expense of my own life. The passion and God-given destiny was already inside me. I just hadn't learned how to use it for His glory, yet while staying whole in my own life. I was born into a birth family, plagued with abuse and neglect, knowing from an early age what pain felt like, what anger looked like, and most of all what rejection felt like. I was learning the life of a slave, trapped, and became more concerned about protecting others rather than protecting myself. At the age of 4, I was adopted, and at 7 found myself faced with emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of those I thought would love me. I became withdrawn and insecure, yet I refused to allow others to see that I was struggling. In an attempt to hide my fears and pain, I put all my energy into helping everyone else. It took the light off me and my problems, enabling me to stay in my denial of I'm okay, Annie is always okay. Beneath the smile, beneath the laughter, beneath the helpfulness was a fragile child falling apart, heartbroken and fearful, a child screaming for someone to hold her tight, not let go, not give up on her, and tell her everything was going to be okay. However, I had to hold it all together. I had to be all things to all people. The mother figure, the best friend, the sister, the helper, the protector, and the teacher. I became consumed by an eating disorder, which only grew stronger when I ran away from home at the age of 17, overwhelmed by self-harm, overworking, perfectionism, and control. I also had a constant need to understand everything in my life. I couldn't understand the pain, so I began to self-harm, a pain I could understand. The enemy twisted every glimpse of truth I knew. I knew the story of Jesus, and that because of His wounds, His scars, and His death, the lives of many would be saved, that He would take the guilt upon Himself. I knew the story, so I believed if I took on the scars, I'd take on the guilt of my abusers, the guilt of myself. I was cutting every day, many times a day, and believed with every cut I was closer to stopping the hurt, the pain, and the guilt. I couldn't understand why I was being abused, so I reasoned away my wants, my feelings, and my pain. I believed I had no worth, so physically others could do what they wanted. The guilt continued to grow. To me, it was another reason why it was my fault. If I could understand what was wrong with me, then I could change who I was. Maybe then I wouldn't be hurt. If I could be in control, and if I could be perfect, maybe I would be loved. Yet even then, I blamed myself for the abuse. I couldn't find reason why I wasn't to blame, until God found my heart. Love consumed fear and mistrust, and a newfound hope began to grow once again. Constantly searching for approval, I became an expert in people-pleasing. The masks I wore served as a method of hiding. The walls went up, and they didn't come down easily. Beneath the surface, I was screaming for help, for someone to see past every single mask, the scars, and every way I coped. I didn't want to live, yet I didn't want to place guilt on anyone else either. Many times, finding myself feeling like piggy in the middle, between God and the enemy. Whilst I was trying to die, sat in a hospital bed, angry at God because He'd refused to answer my only prayer. I didn't understand why. Why was I worth saving? Why was my life so important? In the midst of my confusion, God was placing mercy in the heart of Trish, who later on became my accountability partner. Mercy was my last chance of living. It would mean going back to my roots physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The 7 months I spent waiting to go to Mercy were the hardest. I was ready to die again, oblivious to the bigger picture unfolding before my eyes. On the 11th of October, 17 months ago, I started my journey to freedom. I walked through the doors of Mercy, refusing to glance behind. Not because I knew my freedom was there and that this was going to work, that I didn't believe, but because I believed no one was coming back for me. I was being left behind once again. I arrived at Mercy, bound in shame, guilt, and a strong will to do everything on my own. I had always been a determined individual, yet this developed stubbornness within me. I wasn't going to let go without a fight. I despised food, thrived in control, and couldn't see myself as God saw me. I soon found that I knew of God, yet I didn't understand who He was to me. Like many relationships, I pushed Him away, unable to grasp the idea of letting someone else control my thoughts, my actions, and my life. I held my heart in a glass jar, locked with a padlock only I had the key to. My heart could be seen by everyone, but it certainly wasn't going to be touched. I didn't want to be the person who always put conditions on herself for people to love her, to be the person who would actually write a list of all the reasons why someone shouldn't love me before anyone's even got a chance to get close. The person who condemns herself for statements placed over her body as a child or throughout growing up. I wanted to be the Annie that God made. I wanted to dare to believe that I could actually be loved, that I was loved, and that I could be loved so much that I didn't have to be scared, and in turn strive to make myself good enough to be loved first. I just wanted to believe that, yet everything in my life said the opposite. The desire was there, but that was enough for God. God showed me his heart in a way unique to me, a way I didn't see coming, having only used this method for release of pain and emotions. He gave me a simple drawing that developed into something much more complex. Each little girl represented a new step in my journey with him, each step of finding who I am, who he created me to be. These little girls had become a major part of my journey with God. Within this, he began to reveal himself as my pathway to life, replacing what I once feared with hope. You're going to see a series of little girls up here. Little girl number 1, it should come up in a second. I came to Mercy pushing all anger and emotions to the bottom of myself, believing that showing it outwardly was weak and worthy of punishment. The anger grew and consumed every other emotion with it. I had come to the end of myself. I had nothing left to give, and in the midst of avoiding my anger, I began to scribble across paper, scribbling without any real intention. God birthed the original little girl. As I looked to the paper, I hadn't drawn the usual fearful child in the darkness. This girl was different. She was simple, she was delicate yet strong. Then God added the words that accompanied her, made in his image. I am made in his image. I was not made by mistake, but made on purpose, for a purpose. This began my journey of finding me. Little girl number 2. As I began finding myself for who I was, peeling away who I tried to be, who the world had deemed me to be, vows that I had made during the times I found myself in the darkness were revealed. Vows which held me captive against myself. I vowed I would never let someone love me. I was released to find a love that conquers, a love that now empowers me to love others. I vowed I would never put weight on. I was released to look at food and enjoy it with my friends, without the fear and torment that it once meant. I vowed I'd never unpack my belongings or my life fully. I was released to find my home, the place where life truly begins. I was bound by numbers and expectations, getting weighed each morning, each night, and after I'd eaten, which controlled everything I did or said, even down to every single thing that went into my mouth. The more I tried to escape, the more I found myself trapped. I was being destroyed by my own expectations, my own reflection. Each time I saw a frightened girl, trapped within herself, her eyes glazed over, never gaining the standard. At Mercy, I was empowered to swap the lies I held and replace them with his word, his truth. Another little girl was birthed. I was no longer bound by my expectations and numbers on the tape measure, but by his love that covered every expectation and reflection, a love that didn't involve standards to meet, but I was simply loved. The love of Father a daddy holds for his daughter was my biggest journey within Mercy. Having only known lover's pain, I was weary of anyone loving me, until God used one of my earliest memories to show me his love. Just after I was adopted, my adopted father asked me how much I wanted to be loved. In my first year after being adopted, I had already become a typical daddy's little girl. I did as he did, followed his every footstep, his every move. I wanted to be everything he was. This much, I said, eyes wide open, waiting for him to wrap his arms around me. 3 years later, he became my abuser. I vowed I was never going to be a daddy's little girl again. God restored the memory by replaying the tape. How much do you want to be loved? He asked me. Arms outstretched, tears rolling down my cheeks, I whispered, this much, just as I had to my adoptive father at 4 years old. He directed me to the cross, and in my confusion, I asked why I couldn't understand it, why I couldn't feel it. He told me to look again. This time, instead of pointing to the cross, he himself put his arms out, one to the left and one to the right, just as I had. That's how much I love you. This revelation conquered a broken heart, a lost daughter, and years of pain in a single heartbeat, and he crowned his princess. From slave to princess, I am a daddy's girl. I have a daddy who is patient and kind, a daddy who keeps no record of being wronged, loving me through the ups and downs. I have a daddy who does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices when the truth wins out in my life. A daddy who never gives up on me, never loses faith in me, and walks alongside me through every circumstance. I am a daughter of the King. No strings, just unconditional love. As I learnt this, I began to see his fingerprints in my life. He reminded me of every time I asked for a way out. Each time, without fail, he had already prepared the way. In the times I had needed him most, I hadn't thought to trust. I just simply trusted. As I started removing each mask, God began to unveil a childlike faith within me, where I trusted without questioning motive and allowed myself to be loved without fear of being hurt. I had begun to trust him once again, instead of trying and testing him. There was no more striving to be good enough, and I ended my fleshly attempts to be okay, and fully put my trust in his grace. The very grace that stopped me losing weight, despite my every effort. A grace that gave me strength when I had nothing left to give. A grace that offered a revelation that I don't have to be okay, and that in itself is okay. Grace completely cut into my pride and self-sufficiency. I was trying to be perfect, trying to avoid every mistake possible, when he would accept me just as I was. I was constantly trying, striving, escaping reality, hiding when I could be who he made me to be. My pride was killed, and I could ask for help. I could struggle. I could admit that I was hurting. I could live in reality without running away. I let go of control and what I had been trying to do in 6 months in my own strength, but God did in 6 weeks before I graduated the programme. He broke me and built me up as he saw me ripping apart the labels holding my body together, the words that trapped my mind and the fear that trapped my heart. The cage had been unlocked, and like a baby bird, I was getting ready to spread my wings. The enemy's biggest attack became my biggest weapon for God. As my journey grew and my faith developed, my voice became my weapon. The enemy had taken my voice at a young age. Silenced by fear, my dream of speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves was destroyed. Without my voice, this dream became a far-off fantasy. Now I have my voice. I'm no longer afraid to use it for God's kingdom. The girl who lived in fear of her own potential, her own voice, now stands as a woman of God who will walk in her authority and power, use her voice and speak up. I will speak up for God, with God, and through God. Little girl number 3. The final girl within the Mercy House was birthed within preparing my testimony for graduation. A little girl whose journey is ahead of her. Freedom is now within her grasp, and the pen is in her hands. God asked me one question regarding this little girl. If I could write the next step, where would I go? I once lived a life where I believed I had to know and understand everything, or I was stupid and a failure. Now I live to know God. Knowing other things is an opportunity to learn from the greatest teacher, and I want to go where he goes, love how he loves, and serve how he serves. The life I had given up on was now ahead of me. The life I thought would always be consumed by darkness and fear is now full of joy and adventure. A life deemed by the world as hopeless is now transformed. In God's eyes, my life was always in his care. The journey is not smooth, nor is it easy, but I can tell you there is purpose in the pain. The journey is worth every step. I cannot change my past, nor do I wish to anymore, but my future has changed. Because of God, I'm alive and free. I have a daddy waiting to carry me through every situation I face, who will guide my every step, catch me when I fall, and love me even when I mess up. The girl who thought she was unlovable is loved beyond all measure, more than I could have ever imagined. I ended my Mercy journey asking, Daddy, can we dance now? 10 months later, and my daddy and I have danced in the rain and in the sunshine, jumped in puddles within the storms, where Daddy saw rain and I saw the thunder, seen such beauty in creation, written sermons with him, grown and strengthened relationships, started a business using my creativity with my daddy's heart at the centre of it, and I now support women in similar situations, trying to find their freedom that I stand here having. Talking to God no longer feels like a chore or something I do because I was told to, but simply became a daddy-daughter relationship. Me, a daughter, talking to my daddy. I have been on some amazing adventures with him, adventures that are simply my heartbeat, following his heartbeat. A journey where I have found that sometimes not being in control is the most beautiful part of life. I underestimated what freedom looked like. Now my feet on top of his feet, my hands in his hands. I'm living the life I only dreamt of. But freedom doesn't mean perfection. Freedom means accepting that we are human, that we fail, that we fall, that we even stumble. Freedom means knowing that we are still loved and accepted despite our flaws. Freedom means it's okay to not be okay. He never asked for perfection. He asked for a trusting and obedient heart. I surrendered my heart and gave God control. I'm not saying I get it right all the time. I don't. And I'm not saying I don't argue when God asks me to do something, because I do. But I'm a work in progress, a masterpiece being built. Mercy was just my stepping stone. I let go, I surrendered, and I let God. In letting go, I set myself free. I didn't lose everything I was entitled to. I gained everything I am entitled to because of who my Father is. I gained peace, I gained love, I gained forgiveness, and I gained grace. I gained beauty instead of ashes, life instead of death. and my daddy gave me the privilege of playing a part in changing the world that I live in. I was once taught that the very thing keeping you bound could very well be the thing that God wants you to use. Unbind it, even if it will only help one person. That is enough. That God-given passion and destiny of Galatians 5:1, it is for freedom that you are set free. There was within me of 4 years old, for empowering others into freedom, can now be used for his glory. Because of the miracle of my life, I now believe there is no life too far gone for God to save, heal and restore. No heart is too locked away to love and to be loved by the one who is love, and I choose to stand in the gap for God in being part of hurting women's fight for freedom. Okay.
Hello, I'm Trish. I'm not Eddie. I first met Annie when I was a leader at Celebrate Recovery, which is a support group for people with hurts, habits and hang-ups. That was in 2009, when she was about 19 years old. I didn't really know her. Sorry, it sounds too loud for me. No. Okay. I didn't really know her when she was at Celebrate Recovery. She was in a different group to mine. She just seemed a happy and normal girl with a smile that could light up a room. But I didn't know then that smile was used to mask her struggles and pain from everybody. I was asked to meet up with Annie when she was going through a real dangerous time of a bad crisis of self-harming and suicidal thoughts. I'd never really helped anyone before with life-controlling issues and really felt out of my depth. I tried to engage her, but she just sat in silence, not responding to anything I said, and I had no idea what she was thinking or how I could reach her. I shared some of my past about my eating disorder and issues of self-esteem, and I could see Annie beginning to respond slightly, albeit very guardedly. Annie had learned not to trust anyone because a succession of social workers and counsellors had come and gone throughout her life, so to her I was just another do-gooder. From being a small child, she had learned to keep quiet and say very little to try to deflect any abuse from her parents. She had grown up thinking that she had no voice, and she continued to clam up in self-protection. Whenever I tried to get close and talk about her pain, her set response was to push me away and say, "I'll be okay, Annie's always okay." And she used to say that so much. But deep inside, she was hurting and in despair. At this first meeting, I did anything I could to get information from her, and I learned that she had A-levels in photography and art. So to keep her occupied and divert her from self-harming thoughts, I asked if she would do a piece of artwork for me that she could show me the following week. And I had no idea it would work, but she worked solidly over the next few weeks, thinking of and trying out different ideas and texting me constantly with these. And that really encouraged me because I felt as if I had a connection with her. The end artwork was really good and was an indication of the talent that was waiting to be unleashed. For several years, Annie would immerse herself into her artwork during crises, and it became her voice to express how bad she felt. I also encouraged her to use her artwork to illustrate scriptures of what God said about her, and that God and her new church family were there for her. And this was often after phone calls when she was in despair, and I'd say, well, what does God, draw a picture for me, and that would keep her busy and keep her occupied. Annie seemed to trust me, which was a huge honour, and at church she would cling on to me, wanting big hugs. She just didn't want to let me go, and it was like hugging a frightened 7-year-old child. She was so incredibly fragile and vulnerable, and my heart would go out to her. During some of these times, she would just sob, and all I could do was hold her. She had so much sadness in her heart that came from years of rejection, abuse, and the lie that the abuse was all her fault. She was so desperate for the love and unconditional acceptance of a mother, and that was something I could give her. With God's power and the love and support of her new church family, including Celebrate Recovery, Annie made significant progress over the year. She was getting better, and she'd also started a degree in social sciences. Then, at her 21st birthday, her parents came along and played up, and she plummeted right back to square one. It was devastation. It was terrible to see her cutting again with a vengeance, and she plunged back into her eating disorder and suicidal thoughts. Nothing we could say or do could get her back on track. She was most certainly facing death, and she was starving herself and getting thinner by the day. The more she kept pushing people away, the more we would try to reach into her world and tell her how beautiful and worthy she was. I tried to keep giving her hope that it would be all right one day, because I had overcome, by the grace of God, alcoholism and an eating disorder, and was living proof that recovery was possible. But God had it all in hand. About 4 months later, I went to a New Wine Ladies Conference where Mercy Ministries showed a DVD presentation called Rubies and Pearls, which I think we're going to look at later. It showed girls who had recovered through the Mercy Ministries programme, and they came on stage one by one, and they held up a large piece of card. On one side was written their problem or struggle, and then they would turn it over, and on the other side was their declaration of freedom. I was overwhelmed. I could just clearly see Annie being one of those girls on the stage turning her card over as she walked in her freedom. I just knew I had to call round to Annie's house that night to tell her about Mercy Ministries and encourage her to apply for a place there. However, that day, Annie had taken an overdose and had been admitted to hospital. I went straight there and told Annie all about Mercy, and we snuggled up on the bed and just read through the books which are on the stand over there. And I bought quite a few from the stand at the New Wine Conference. And this was the beginning of new hope for her. Annie did apply for Mercy Ministries, but it took 7 months before Annie entered the Mercy House due to complications with paperwork. And it was really touch and go if Annie would make it during this time. This required us to really step up support and try and keep her on track, to keep encouraging her, reminding her of God's promise for her life, and to show her that she was loved, accepted and valued. Dropping Annie off at the Mercy House on October the 11th, all those times years ago, was difficult. It just felt like we were abandoning her. But the love and acceptance that met her from the staff when she walked through the doors was amazing. And I knew she was in very safe and loving hands. God had brought her to the right place. Staff at Mercy had asked me to be Annie's accountability partner during her stay, and also when she came home for weekends every month. My role was to encourage her, to continue to walk with her in her journey, to gently challenge her, to ensure she kept close to God, and to just love her without condition or judgment. Annie was allowed 2 phone calls every Saturday for 15 minutes, so Eddie and I would phone her every week. For much of the time, she'd be very quiet on the phone, and for a long time we had to coax conversation out of her. As she started to get better, though, she became more chatty about what she'd been doing and her progress. Then she came back at Christmas 2 months later, and that was a hard time for Annie. When she came back for 2 weeks, she plummeted right back to square one again. And I really needed to engage with her. And we started to work through the Bible, and one of the things that Mercy Ministries do is they sort of talk about truth statements. So we found over 80 scriptures of truth statements which contradicted the 80 lies that defined her life. And in fact, I think the lies that defined your life were 120 in the end. But the truth statements contradicted those, and it was amazing for her to hold on to. Back at Mercy, after Christmas, Annie found letting go of these lies that ingrained her life really tough. But step by step, she made progress and had significant breakthroughs. Several weeks before Annie was due to graduate, I was asked to support Annie in decluttering her room back home and either burn or recycle any items that had negative connotations and could draw her back. Annie left no stone unturned and went through her bedroom, sorting everything into bonfire or recycle piles. And we had a large bonfire in our side garden where Annie ceremonially said goodbye to the old memories and embraced her new life. It was a very moving and significant occasion, and one I will never forget. At Mercy Ministries, Annie learned that she was loved by her daddy, the Lord God Almighty. She walked into freedom when she received his unconditional love and grace, and she learned that none of the rejection and abuse had been her fault. Joel 2:25 promises that God will restore the year that the locusts have eaten. And today Annie stands tall as a beautiful, talented and confident 23-year-old woman of God, no longer a 7-year-old frightened child hiding in the corner. Today, Annie has a smile that can light up a room, and today that smile is genuine. Today, Annie has a voice that she is passionate about using to help set others free, sharing her love and compassion with others. 1 Corinthians 1 says, God comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. And Annie is living this scripture out in her life to set the captives free.
I only stand up here as a guy to try and explain in some way, the importance of the male role in this situation. And I had no idea I was getting involved at this level. So here goes. I met Annie in 2009 when she attended a recovery group we were involved in called Celebrate Recovery. I had arrived early to set up and sensed I was not alone, and I spotted a little figure at the back of the room, sitting on the floor between the seats, sobbing. She appeared very uncomfortable if I came too close, so I kept my distance and prayed for Trish or one of the other ladies to show up as soon as possible. Annie continued to attend the group and also came to church on Sunday mornings and was one of the busiest people I've ever known. She eventually started to trust me and would come for a hug, and I teased her mercilessly and made her laugh. I found it difficult to communicate with Annie in those early days, as her response to almost everything I said was yes, no, or it don't matter. Annie was suffering from a severe eating disorder and was self-harming. I had a little knowledge of eating disorders from being married to Trish, obviously, but did not understand self-harm. By the way, I'm a recovering alcoholic, so... Annie was spending more time around us at Celebrate, at church and at our home, and had asked Trish if she would be her mum, and had started calling her mummy. One evening, as we were sat watching TV, she turned to me and casually said, I suppose if Trish is my mummy, that means you're my daddy. So that's how I came to be adopted. And just around this time, I received an email from Annie. And this is after we knew each other for about a year. And it said, this is from Annie to me, it said, scared of men, scared of being hurt, scared of letting anyone be my dad. You changed that. Yes, you and your craziness restored my faith in men. Last year I kept you as far away as possible, or as far as I could physically manage anyway. God had different ideas. You once told me to never stop being Annie, before I even knew who Annie was. You allowed me to grow, to prosper, even though you already knew what it was that I was meant to be doing. You just kept pushing, and that I am eternally grateful for. You loved me for exactly who I am, and that's all this little girl needed. You allowed me to be silly around you, beat you up, attack you, all the things little girls should do with a dad. I longed for a dad, and God gave me you. He did a pretty good job. Thank you for being you. That choked me up. Now I've lost my place. Annie was living at this time with Des and Sue, which a landlord and landlady were another gift from God. She picked them out of the paper. They could have been anybody, and they're like family, aren't they? Annie was living with Des and Sue, and we became increasingly concerned for her health and her survival. I mean, Des is not a Christian, but man, he'd kill for that girl. Absolutely. And he was so supportive of Celebrate Recovery and all of that. We was really concerned for her survival as she slipped further into anorexia and self-harm. The trips to hospital became more frequent, and we all realised how much this little girl had come to mean to us, and we were losing her. She'd crept under the radar, big style. Trish attended a New Wine conference in Harrogate and found out about Mercy Ministries, a Christian residential program for women with life-controlling issues. She came home crying to find Annie in hospital again, and I remember watching Trish and Annie sat on the hospital bed, reading the information, those books, sat on the hospital bed reading the information about Mercy, and I saw something beautiful in Annie's eyes, hope. real hope. Then began the long process of getting Annie a place on the Mercy residential programme, of which I had nothing to do with, by the way. This was all Trish and other people. I got the easy bit. The day finally arrived on the 11th of October 2011. We arrived at Mercy House with a very scared little girl and handed her over to the lovely Gemma, who was the house mother at Mercy, some girl. I had a sense of peace about leaving Annie there, as all the staff had what can only be described as the love of God shining through them. A year later, that was 2011, I think I've got another piece of paper. Is that mine? No, it's this one. So this is a year from the day. Annie would have been out of Mercy about 5 months now. And so a year on, she sent me a text, and it said, "A year ago, I walked through the doors of Mercy, starving for love, yet fearing this was just a broken, fearful 7-year-old being dropped off and left behind. Little did I know how dramatically my life would have changed a year on. Thank you for loving me without questioning, for challenging me to grow, for the joyous times and the tough times. Thank you for giving me the love of God when I couldn't understand. Thank you for helping me believe and trust rather than understand. Now I stand a grown woman of God, walking out a life I only dreamt of, allowing Daddy, our Father in heaven, to change my fears into daughter. I'm here, from starving to die, to hungry to serve. Thank you for supporting before, through, and after Mercy. Grateful is an understatement." And the question I leave you with is, who do you think benefited more from this relationship? And I'll let you think about that.
All the lies you've held inside so long, and they are nothing in the shadow of the cross. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You are made for so much more than all of this. You're beautiful. You're beautiful. You are treasured. You are sacred. You are His. You're beautiful.